Good morning and welcome to the January 24th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. I'm going to jinx us and say we have a lighter agenda today, but I would still ask all commissioners to hold all questions and comments until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments so we can move through the agenda efficiently. We start every meeting with the opportunity for the public to speak on an item that is not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak on an item not contained on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to move us on to the consent agenda. There's one item listed on the consent agenda today. That is case Z8122 on Clearfield Drive. This is a request to rezone approximately 8.5 acres from industrial mixed-use 3 stories with special highway overlay district 2 to commercial mixed-use 12 stories conditional use with special highway overlay district 2. I understand that this item is ready to be heard today, and the out-of-town applicant is here with us. So without objection, I'd like to hear the staff presentation and hear from the applicant, acknowledging that this item will be deferred to our next meeting to ensure the public is properly noticed. Without objection, I'd like to start with a staff presentation from Donald Belk.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This is a 8.5 acre site. Request is rezoned from industrial mixed use 3 stories to commercial mixed use 12 stories, and the SHOD 2 overlay would apply, and your deadline is March the 25th. Please note the prevalence of industrial, both industrial and industrial mixed use zoning on 3 sides, and there's the residential and commercial mixed use south of I-540. This is reflected in the aerial, noting the large areas of industrial and commercial, Millbrook Park, and prevalence of low-density residential further out. A close-up of the site with Gresham's Lake shown. This site is at the corner of the CSX Railroad and I-540 where it passes over, and just a few aerials showing that location. This parcel is site is constrained. There's presently no access to the site. Just some photos of surrounding areas. This is the residential mixed-use area to the south of I-540, the Perry Point Apartments, and some images of the industrial uses, both light and heavy industrial uses near the site. 3 conditions. Some uses are prohibited, as you see. There is a landscape buffer that would be provided. This would replicate the frontage and also go along with what's already required in the SHOD 2. Some exceptions there that the landscape buffer can include greenways, trails, etc. And also importantly to this case, non-residential uses shall be limited to a maximum of 30,000 square feet. Some comparisons here between the existing zoning and the proposed zoning. You can see the substantial increases in residential unit entitlement, but again, the non-residential uses would be capped at 30,000 square feet. The transportation energy analysis, the site itself basically scores 0 on everything because of its lack of access, but the property right across I-540 where this would eventually connect has good scores all the way around. The site is about 3/4 of a mile away from the nearest bus service at Old Wake Forest in Ruritania. This would add to the housing supply and permit a variety of housing types with smaller units. A note, the demographic index, it is slightly higher in, or higher in all of these indicators, with the exception of population over age 64, than the Raleigh average. And the change in median gross rent in this particular census tract is substantially a little bit higher than the city average. The request would be inconsistent with the future land use map. The property is designated presently as business and commercial services. And again, there is no frontage proposed. This is shown on urban form with the Parkway corridor, but that condition would provide consistency with that frontage. Again, it's consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, but it is inconsistent with the flume, consistent with urban form. A note here, the consistent policies noted. I'll point out infill development, particularly as this site is vacant. It's access constrained, and this would serve to redevelop the site. It's a site, too, that should be noted is not really suitable for continued industrial development because of its location and lack of access. A number of inconsistent policies here. It would nonetheless take away some of our stock of industrial land, so it falls inconsistent with that policy. Again, your deadline for action is March 25th. There are no outstanding issues with this proposal, and staff recommends deferral and 3 meetings upcoming before your recommendation deadline. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we will hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Commission. I'm Collier Marsh with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street here on behalf of the applicant. First of all, appreciate the Commission taking the time to consider this matter since it was originally on the consent agenda, but we've resolved the issues that initially placed it on the consent agenda, and we wanted to make sure that if there were further changes that need to be made before a vote occurs, that we hear them today so that we can adapt and take advantage of this time between today's meeting and the Planning Commission's next meeting. So this is the Clearfield Drive rezoning. So here's the site and the surrounding area for context. And I think this slide really tells the story of the site and what's going on here. There's no access to the site today. Bounded by 540 to the south, those are railroad tracks to the east, and then Gresham's Lake to the north, railroad tracks to the west, Gresham's Lake to the north and east. So completely surrounded without vehicular, pedestrian, or bicycle access today. And so one of the themes that you'll see in this rezoning that drives what we're seeking is, well, what neighborhood are we in? What are you going to tie to? The answer to that is, although the site is on a future land use map designation that envisions it as being part of the industrial area, the site's physically isolated from that industrial area by a lake. And in our estimation, I think in staff's estimation, continued industrial use is not appropriate for this hidden lake in northeast Raleigh that no one's taking advantage of. Instead, access for the site will come from the south, so we will actually have to construct a road from that point under 540 to the site. So it's a large effort to get access to the site, but that's coming from a regional mixed-use center where we have residential and commercial uses. And so we envision, and I think the nature of access confirms that this site will really be part of the community to the south of 540, and it will allow an opportunity to expand that regional mixed-use center, to expand residential uses around a hidden gem, which is Gresham's Lake. And so this would be the first domino to fall to allow opening of a really exciting area in Raleigh. I can clear this. Let's see, maybe not. So again, the existing zoning is IX3. There's the SHOD2 overlay. We're proposing CX12 conditional use, keeping that SHOD2 overlay. Standard kind of prohibited uses, less desirable uses. 50-foot landscape buffer along 540. Planning Commission may recall a case that we brought a few months back on the other side at the intersection of 540 and Capitol One, that northeastern quadrant. This was a comment that came up that was proposing a 25-foot buffer. We had assumed TCA would be the full 50 feet. We ended up adding a condition to have the 50-foot buffer. So here we saw the writing on the wall and started with that 50-foot buffer. We expect that will largely be tree conservation anyway, but to the extent there's some disturbance or some grading required, that would then be filled in with additional vegetation. That non-residential use cap is also included. I think practically with the site constraints and short-term development, not likely to have a lot of commercial development, so this would be largely a residential development, but we want to keep open the opportunity to have some good ground floor non-residential uses in this area. So again, talking about access and how that drives the request, this slide shows excerpts from the transportation plan, and what we have here, again, we see that purple dashed line, that's an Avenue 2-lane divided street that would provide access. And so as part of this project, we would be providing that Avenue 2-lane divided street and undertaking a substantial effort to get to the site under 540. And this is some of the schematics of what that would include. So not only do you have vehicular access, but you do have sidewalks and you do have two-way bicycle traffic. So we are opening up this area not only to vehicles, to pedestrians and bicycles, and I guess creating a future point of access for the surrounding area. We think additional development will follow. Future land use map. As Don pointed out, we are inconsistent with the current designation of business and commercial services. And if you read what that calls for in the comprehensive plan, it's really industrial uses. So business and commercial services sounds like it's going to be, I don't know, office and things like that, but it really calls for industrial type uses, and that residential isn't appropriate. And I think when this was designated, access wasn't determined. So no one knew how it was going to be accessed, but we saw 540 to the south, and surely you're not going to go under 540 to get to the site. So let's go ahead and include this with the surrounding us industrial area to the north. But now we know that access is actually coming from the south. We've got a regional mixed use center to the south, and so the change to the future land use map would be to add this to that regional mixed use designation on the future land use map, make this site consistent with the area to which it will connect. I think it should also not be lost that you can see the parks and open space in green cutting off this site from that industrial area to the north. I think that's important. I don't think that industrial uses should be encouraged here. I think residential, making this an amenity for the city. The town's parks plan calls for greenways that run kind of right along here, so an easement would be dedicated. And we've got a lake right there. So I really think that this project provides a major opportunity to re-envision the site to, again, I guess, unlock this area. Consistent with the comprehensive plan in a number of ways, and the staff report did find overall consistency. Obviously providing housing, providing important streets called for in the transportation plan, developing a very challenging site to develop and some important infill development, and working, I guess, with some environmental protection policies you see there to develop in a more sensitive way than industrial uses. I think some of the surrounding uses to the north are, there's a concrete plant, there's a granite and gravel plant, and those aren't the things that we should be encouraging on this site. So that is this proposal in a nutshell, and we understand we'll be coming back in a couple of weeks for a vote, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, thank you. Before we move on to questions, I just want to make sure that there are no members of the public to speak on this item. Okay, then I will open up for questions and comments from commissioners. I can start off. I just quickly noted the 2 neighborhood meetings, you had no attendees. And then a question for staff. There were no comments coming in on the engagement portal. Okay. I did notice in the EJ screen a slightly higher percentage of linguistically isolated population. if we have this span of time and we do acknowledge we're going to be sending out additional notice, I just recommend that maybe we look into what the nature of the primary language spoken in the area is. Questions and comments from commissioners?
I have a quick clarifying question. I noticed there are just some differences in the staff report that was just handed to us and the staff report in here and also the presentation here and the presentation. So just clarifying at a future meeting what, I'm guessing that this staff presentation is the most up to date. Is that right?
That's right. So the staff report that was published indicated that there were some outstanding questions about water and sewer access and also about zoning conditions offered by the applicant that would limit entitlement to, instead of requiring a transportation impact analysis. So we did receive those conditions from the applicant in December that limited entitlement.
Okay.
And so that's what's reflected in the paper packet in front of you today.
With the no outstanding issues.
That's right.
that
No
correct?
outstanding
Okay.
issues on the case. That's why the chair asked that we discuss it rather than defer it out
Sure.
of hand on the consent agenda.
Gotcha. And then in addition, on the one just passed out, it lists the maximum non-residential square footage at above 30,000 square feet on the one that was just distributed. But I
The
think
numbers
that-
in the presentation were correct.
Presentation
The
was correct,
condition
okay.
limits it to 30,000 square feet.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner
I was
Otwell?
hoping that Mr. Belk would speak to the inconsistency of open space in a new development, what that means in this case, and what might be done to address it.
As Collier's presentation showed, the prevalence of open space, public parks and open space area, there is, the Greenway plan does show a greenway fronting that tract. How, and a reservation would be required in this case, but based on my comments from the park staff, the reservations can expire, and they believe that a voluntary dedication from the applicant would get in a condition, would give assurances that that land would be there. So that's really the basis of that inconsistency. It's true the applicant would be required to dedicate in the case of a residential development.
While you're up. What does the city, what do we do when, like, this is going to be the high-speed rail corridor? I believe this is the S line that this is on.
CSX. Mhm.
What planning considerations does the city have about developments up against a high-speed rail corridor? Is it any different than a stub that never sees a train? Do we treat it differently?
I am not certain of what type of barrier might be required. In the case of that.
I see Mr. Myers.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Otwell, is your question about the compatibility of a land use adjacent to the infrastructure from the standpoint of the impacts of the infrastructure and the land use, or is your question about the adjacency of what is a people conveying corridor to transit supportive land use?
I guess it's just, it's an exploratory question. So I don't have any problem with a residential development next to a high-speed rail corridor. I think it's appropriate. I don't think that there's any possibility for like access here. That doesn't look very realistic. I was just wondering if the city treats this differently than any other rail corridor when there's development, residential development going along it.
I don't believe, and I'm going to defer to my planning colleagues a little bit on this, that there's anything in our comp plan that specifically identifies this corridor as different. I know there are some considerations about, I remember recently there was a discussion about a text change for, I think it was self-storage, and something was written into that helped prevent there from being self-storage in an area that might become commuter rail transit-oriented development. But I don't know if that is otherwise in the comp plan. I will say that there hasn't been any planning that would push a station to this location, partly because the nature of I-540 is it's going to make it very difficult to develop that much within a walkable distance. So if there were a commuter rail service on the S line, there might be stations within a decent bike of this distance, but there certainly wouldn't be within a walking distance. I don't think that the nature of a high-speed passenger train from a proximity standpoint is actually probably less impactful to adjacent line uses than a long freight train because the amount of time and the amount of axles and the banging and everything. So I don't think we would need to be too concerned about the proximity of would be a very fast through sort of train when there was a train.
I'm going to tag on to your question. It might be helpful maybe to have just emailed information about the S-Line TOD study, if there were any considerations that came out of that process. I'm going to acknowledge that's not the city's project, so it might take a little bit of time for staff to gather that information and then just forward it to us via email. And the additional question, Commissioner Alder?
I had a transportation-related question. Sorry, I'll let you get all the way back to your seat. I guess my question was related to the connection to Overlook Road. It looks like they are going to be limited to one point of access in and out. Am I correct in thinking that that connection would not be made until the properties, I guess, preventing that connection are developed, at which time the connection would be made?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a map to be able to. There we go. This is what I wanted. Nope. Do we have the street plan in here, Don? Okay. Well, I did see it in the applicant's presentation. I'm gonna sketch the street plan on here very roughly. So Sumner Boulevard extension passes along the site and connects to that, and then this comes around. There's a small error there, but yeah, so the way that this street from the industrial development to the current terminus is going to be developed is generally through development exactions, through a developer building their obligation for that. The one exception is probably going to be the stream crossing in this location, and the way I think that would likely happen is if this site were to develop and build to the point of its last driveway or to the point of a good turnaround or something, dedicate what was pointing at that stream crossing, then the other side eventually did the same thing, then the city would do a public project to tie the two together. And the city has done a preliminary functional alignment and environmental analysis of how that would happen to be able to help support developers like this one in those decision making and to make sure that things are lined up correctly. But we're not programmed at this point to go purchase property and develop this new street absent a development plan in here. At some point when there's a missing gap, we'll start thinking about that. But that seems quite a ways off at this point. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Okay. Any additional questions? Commissioner O'Haver?
Thank you, Chair Fox. I would like to sort of pick up on Commissioner Otwell's comment about the inconsistency on the LU 8.9 open space and new development. I don't really see any conditions that are addressing that. I mean, it's a substantial increase in maximum units, over 1,000. And again, to be consistent, I think I made the same comment at the last meeting that I would encourage the applicant to look at some potential conditions, and even Mr. Belk had mentioned some concerns from the city on that. So that's my first comment. And then my question is, the applicant, their last slide had mentioned consistency with environmentally sensitive design, natural resource protection, and I don't really see any conditions on that. So is that, I guess that consistency is due to city requirements, and is there a need, again, the applicant even commented that this is the first key to unlock development around Gresham Lake, and I just don't see any conditions that are pointing to that consistency on some of the policies in the comp plan. Then my last comment is also inconsistency on policy PR 5.4 and improving park access. There was a mention of greenway adjacent to the site. Is there a need to condition providing access to that greenway, or is that required through the code?
Before you answer, let me tag on to that. I guess, put more bluntly, would the applicant consider voluntary dedication for the greenway and or additional public amenity space?
Yeah, so these are your first and third question, that question are all tied together. So the nature of the open space and then the Parks and Rec comment, they're all the same, which is that there's a greenway corridor through the area, and it would be better, as I understand it, to have a reservation of the land to make sure that the portion of our site that's within that greenway corridor is included. So that is the genesis of that open space comment. It's all about this greenway corridor that kind of goes across the edge of our site. So before we saw the staff report, what happens at site plan is you're required to dedicate that. So we didn't anticipate a need to further condition because it happens at site plan. But as we understand it, there's a desire for something additional to provide another assurance. So we are more than happy to work with staff to add whatever language to make sure that the portion of our site within the Greenway corridor is included. Now, to your broader question about environmental sensitivity and those policies, it's an industrially zoned site right now, and they're industrial uses. And so I think what we're looking at is the bigger picture and the long-range planning for the site, and the fact that what's contemplated here and what is here today is not environmentally sensitive. We've driven the site, and I think you'd be shocked at what people can get away with in close proximity to this lake without much repercussion. And so when you now redevelop the site under the city's code, things are going to change for the better. There is that greenway corridor. That lake is designated as parks and open space. And so by initiating the redevelopment of a industrial site that drains into Gresham's Lake, it's for the best.
Can I follow up on that as well? This may be a question for staff, and I'm not really quite sure which member of staff. During the development process, so during construction, would there be additional regulations, restrictions, requirements about construction adjacent to Gresham Lake? I'm thinking things like silt fences, something like that. Is that already a component of the code?
I think stormwater staff could speak more explicitly, but I would expect that all riparian regulations would apply.
There's already some significant environmental permitting that's started on this. So this site has a lot of oversight, and that's begun much earlier than it typically has for projects.
So I think the consideration of additional conditions and comments on the Greenway would be appreciated. I also just want to go back to asking you to consider, I totally understand that the nature of the development is an improvement as to what's happening, but just because we'd be shocked at what can go in there doesn't make me feel like we should just develop the site. I feel like there's an opportunity here, especially since it's the first development there, setting the tone to look to provide some additional measures. I don't know what those are. Again, that's sort of just a comment from me. And then I want to go back to Chair Fox's comment again. There's maximum of 1,200 units. Will you build that many? I think some type of commitment to open space within the site would also be preferable in addition to the Greenway dedication. So those are just my comments for the next meeting.
Thanks.
Excellent. If there are no additional questions or comments from commissioners at this time, I'll just note we should keep note of our Planning Commission emails in case additional information comes from staff regarding the S-Line TOD study, and if that's a relevant consideration here. Looks like we're going to defer this item to our February 14th meeting to allow the applicant additional time to consider conditions about the voluntary dedication of the Greenway and additional open space and any other environmental measures they see fit to include.
I'll ask a question just about timing and procedure. Since there's only one crack at making amendments, if we might hear public comments next time, I don't know if it makes sense to go ahead and include them for the February 14th or not. It sounds like there's not a lot of public engagement anyway, so maybe just wanted to mention that idea.
Yeah, we are going to incorporate everything we've heard tonight before we come back. To the extent that someone does show up that hasn't showed up in the process, obviously we're prepared to react as well. But hopefully we'll address everything between now and the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, that is Commissioner Raines, apologies.
Question, a request if this updated report can be sent out with the meeting minutes or separately to the commissioners.
Excellent, thank you, good point. All right, On to the committee report. There is one item coming out of the Strategic Planning Committee today. That is the Wakefield Small Area Study Final Report and Comprehensive Plan Amendments. We will need to take a vote to allow me to recuse myself from this item and allow Vice Chair Miller to take over.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to recuse Chair Fox from item D1, the Wakefield Small Area Plan. Is there a second? Commissioner Otwell is seconded. All those in favor? The vote is unanimous. And the Wakefield Small Area Plan was discussed by the Strategic Planning Committee on January 12th, 2023, where the committee voted unanimously to recommend approval. Committee Chair Lampman, would you like to complete your report?
Yes. Hannah Rakow gave a great presentation at the committee, and we had a robust discussion with the committee with members from the public, and we appreciated their feedback and active notes were taken. In that, do we have an update from staff? Would staff like to go over the committee or over the presentation for the rest of the committee? I don't know. Okay, great. With that, if there are no comments from any committee members who participated that evening, any updates or thoughts on the discussion?
It was pretty, we were pretty much in favor of it. There didn't seem to be any big problems at the end. When we voted, there didn't seem to be much contention. The comments from the public, their desires and concerns seems to line up with the priorities addressed in the plan, and thought it was appropriate to move forward.
Yeah. And again, good feedback from the community. So in that, the committee voted unanimously to recommend approval. And the deadline for Planning Commission item action is March 13th. Do we have any comments from the rest of the committee?
I just have one quick question. There's a list of projects as part of that report. Is there a matrix for priorities for those projects, or is it just, Hannah, if you could answer that.
Yeah, we did some engagement in the last round to understand the community's priorities, but the matrix at the end is really to identify what funding would be needed.
I didn't hear that.
Sure. The matrix at the end is listing the estimated funding that would be needed. The prioritization would be built into the existing.
Okay, so there's no intersection that's going to be, there's a series of intersections are going to be the first ones. It's going to be as funds become available.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That was a good topic that was also discussed at the committee, and what we were uncovering is that essentially as new projects come online, that those projects then have a roadmap and kind of like an opportunity to adhere to the Wakefield area study plan. So it'll be like as items progress, as that area develops out, this is the footprint for them.
Okay.
Or the roadmap.
Thank you.
But how council funds it and what order in which they fund the projects is strictly their policy decision.
Okay.
As it unfolds over time, yeah. Great. In that, oh, go ahead.
Just had one other comment or question out of curiosity. I noticed the street cross section shows bike lanes with bollards separating from the roadway. Is there a reason why that cross section was selected over? It seems like recent text change to street cross sections show that as like a separated bike lane.
Yes. So over the course of this project, the city's standard for separated bike lane has changed. The transportation can elaborate on this. My understanding is that the bollard design could be sort of a stopgap measure in between, easily implemented, but new streets would be built with that higher standard.
Yeah, not to correct Ms. Rakow, because what she said was correct. I'm going to expand upon that a little bit. I think the consultant team that did this study made some recommendations and showed in more artistic renderings, what might be done with that space. The exact types of pavement marking treatments that we might mount on the surface to improve that is really an engineering decision and a maintenance decision that would have to be made at a time of doing that. Given that the street is already constructed, most of these streets are already constructed with the curbs and gutters and asphalt surfaces they are, it's unlikely that we're going to go in and move curbs around. That's an extremely expensive proposition, but there's a lot of things we can do that's a little bit more interim, and those images illustrate a few of those things. If there were site plans or new streets being constructed, they would be built to our new standards.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments at the table? Then Committee Chair Lampman, would you like to make a motion?
Yes. I would like to make a motion to adopt the Wakefield Small Area Study Final Report and Comprehensive Plan amendments.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Otwell seconded. All those in favor, could you raise your hand? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Chair Fox may resume her duties.
Excellent. Okay, moving on to old business. There's one item listed under old business today. This item has been previously discussed and we have heard from the public, so we will begin with a short update from staff focusing on revisions to the request. This is item Z6722 on Skyland Ridge Parkway. We will start with that update from Sarah Shaughnessy.
Good morning, Sarah Shaughnessy, Planning and Development. This case was first heard December 13th, and the applicant has submitted new conditions that add requirements for the outdoor amenity, clarify floor area for non-residential uses, and add some requirements for frontage related to urban form. So just to refresh your memory, a quick overview of where the site is located. The zoning in the area is commercial mixed use to the south. The site itself is also commercial mixed use and partially a planned development. Another aerial view. I'll just flip through these since you've already seen them. So here is a summary of the revised proposed conditions. The ones with a star indicate the new conditions. So as you can see, number 3 is a combination of 2 previous conditions and limits non-residential uses to 400,000 square feet, specifying that office uses are limited to 200,000 square feet and retail uses also 200,000 square feet. And then, as I said, additional conditions require improvements to the outdoor amenity, require a sidewalk along Skyland Ridge Parkway, restrict parking between buildings and Skyland Ridge, and require a build-to line for Skyland Ridge Parkway. So all of this information you've seen before. Just want to highlight that the new proposed conditions does bring this request into consistency with the urban form map designation. And a review of the consistent and inconsistent policies. Currently, there are no outstanding issues, and your deadline for action is February 11th.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments from any commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I will move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement from January 24th, 2023, contained in the agenda materials. Recommend approval of the zoning amendment. It is in the public interest because it allows additional housing and mixed use in an area serviceable by transit.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Commissioner Rains? Commissioner Otwell has recommended a motion for approval for Z6722. Commissioner Rains has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the new business portion of the agenda, there is one item today that is TCZ 6122 on Falls of Neuse Road. This is a request to change zoning conditions to expand the allowable uses to include up to 250 residential units and removes the square foot limit for a grocery store. We will start with a staff presentation from Sarah Shaughnessy.
Good morning again. So as Chair stated, this is a request for 4500 Falls of Neuse Road. Your deadline for action is March 25th. So as you can see from the zoning map, the zoning in the area is predominantly commercial mixed use with some office mixed use to the north and west, and then industrial and residential to the east. Here's an overview of the site. So it's largely a shopping center off of Falls of Neuse with Old Wake Forest Road there to the east. Some street views of the site. That's Falls of Neuse Road looking north to the site, sort of at that entrance. And then Memory Road, which turns into the parking lot for the site. As you can see, the site is to the left there. It was formerly a Steinmart. It's now vacant. And then the image to the bottom there is Old Wake Forest Road looking west, sort of behind the shopping center. So a summary of the proposed conditions. The request is to eliminate, there are previously 9 conditions. The request is to remove 8 of those. The first condition is retained, and that's a limit to the retail space, limiting that to 240,000 square feet of gross building square footage. There may be no more than 140,000 square feet of retail space and no more than 100,000 square feet of gross building space for office use. And then it also adds a condition allowing up to 250 dwelling units. The existing conditions prohibited residential use on the site. So just a brief overview of the change in entitlement from the requested zoning. I think the main change here is just noting that under the proposed zoning, 250 residential units would be allowed. Looking at the transportation and energy analysis, this site scores lower on all of these metrics than the citywide average, so lower walk score, bike score, transit score, transportation cost index, and job proximity. It is served by the Go Raleigh Route 2, which goes from downtown north to Falls of Neuse at Strickland Road, and that comes every 30 minutes. Here's a snapshot of our affordability analysis. It does add to the housing supply, as I mentioned. It does not include subsidized units. Regarding demographics and land use history, it has a demographic index similar to Raleigh's overall, and that is a measure of overall population that is low income and or a racial or ethnic or linguistic minority. So again, similar to Raleigh overall. And of note, the housing costs in this area have increased actually at a lower rate than the citywide average. The requested zoning is consistent with the future land use map designation. Again, the base zoning and the frontage and the height are all requested to remain the same. The parking limited frontage is not going to change. It is consistent with the urban form map designation. Consistent with the flume and the urban form map and the comprehensive plan overall. Just noting some consistent policies here. Staff found no inconsistent policies. And your deadline for action is March 25th. There are no outstanding issues.
Excellent, thank you. Next, we will hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. I'm here today with Dustin Hicks from the Sterling Organization, the applicant for this request. As you heard, this is an existing shopping center. And although it does include that former Steinmart site, there are other retail uses in this center as well. As you heard, the requested zoning district is not changing. The existing condition driving this request is an existing prohibition on grocery stores over 20,000 square feet. That Steinmart site is about double that. It has been dark for a couple of years now. And so the idea is that it may appeal to a broader audience if we could allow that larger grocery store use. So that is really what's driving the request. As you know, when we propose new zoning conditions, we actually have to propose each zoning condition as though it were new, even if it's not. So we evaluated each of those old zoning requests. As you heard, there were 9 of them. And And it turns out that, although I am prepared with slides, if you wanted to walk through the why of each one, the theme is that those zoning conditions really pertained to initial development. They were primarily, I think the vast majority were requirements that happened along the roadway, along Falls of Neuse. And so there was, a turn lane, a buffer, things like that. And it actually primarily impacted these outlots that are not part of the request today. So all of those things were built. They were not things that we could go ahead and propose anew today. And the only other significant change that is noteworthy, you heard about the former prohibition on dwelling units. And the reason for that change is not due to any plan to incorporate those soon. It was simply that prohibition no longer aligns with our city policies, and so we went ahead and permitted them in a way consistent without driving a major increase in traffic. So that was where that change came from. But as I said, the genesis of the request is very simply about that grocery store size limitation, and we are available for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I just want to check if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on this item. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to questions and comments from commissioners. Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. On the, for the applicant, on the topic of the removal of the conditions, there were a significant number of conditions removed. And I understand that you're saying that this particular parcel should be excluded because of the other parcels facing the main street, but are the other parcels still required to hold those conditions that are struck from this request?
Those conditions would still exist on those other parcels. However, even for those parcels, as I mentioned, for the most part, the conditions pertain to initial development and have been satisfied. So for example, and you can see in this aerial, there's a buffer required, a tree buffer that is in place, and they would be required to continue to maintain that by that condition. The others relate to, there's a median in Falls of Neuse that prevents left turns. So, that sort of is there, it's in place. There was a requirement for a turn lane that exists. So those sorts of things simply remain, although they would still be conditions on those other parcels.
I'm glad to see that this is not a imminent redevelopment because this is right next to my office and Bernie's Sweets is right there, and we always get those sweet croissants and donuts brought into the office. It'd be very sad if they went away, but.
Thank you.
Excellent point. To follow up on Commissioner Rain's comments, I don't know if this is where you were going. Is there an opportunity to include the remainder of the parcels in this TCZ?
We can confirm. I understand those are in separate ownership today. Yes.
They're separate
Those are
ownership?
separate
Okay.
ownership.
That makes it more challenging. Okay. Personally, I'm not seeing a significant amount of inconsistency with this. Mr. York, did you want to say something?
I was going to let the Planning Commission finish their discussion.
Okay. Are there any additional questions or comments or observations of inconsistencies? No? Mr. York, go ahead.
Yes, for the very reason you were just mentioning, since the current zoning parcel, the current zoning district includes those street fronting out parcels, technically this is a map amendment. It goes through the exact same procedure. It's the same application, it's just checking one box versus another. I think that's a technical correction that can occur between here and Planning Commission. But after consultation with my other colleagues in the City Attorney's Office, I think it's best for everybody if it's converted to a map amendment. It doesn't harm what has already occurred. That's still valid because, like I said, it's the exact same procedure. And so it's very likely we will be converting this with the applicant's assistance from a text change or zoning condition text change to a map amendment because we're now creating really 3 districts. The 2 out parcels to the north, the 1 out parcel to the south, and the bulk of the shopping center because the rules are different. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Would that mean it would come back through Planning Commission as old business, or that's a correction between Planning
I
Commission
think
and
that's a
council?
correction that could be made. If you all want to make a recommendation today, I think that's a correction that can be made before the packet's put together for the city council's meeting in February. I see. I'm shaking her head.
Okay, excellent.
So it should not require any delay.
Excellent. And in looking through this one, it looks like the original zoning case was from 1991. Is that correct? Okay. All right. So many of these changes bring it in alignment with current market realities and city policy. Okay. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll motion to approve case TCZ 6122 and to adopt the approved consistency statement contained in today's agenda materials. I'd also like to add in the motion that a recommendation that staff and the applicant put together the appropriate map amendment before sending this to council.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Commissioner Dottell? Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of TCZ 6122, and Commissioner Dottell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. All right, that concludes all of our discussion items. And now we are on to approval of the meeting minutes. The draft meeting minutes from the January 10th Planning Commission meeting are included in the backup. If there are no comments or recommendations for edits, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Okay. So Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of the minutes, and Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. By show of hands, those in support and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to other business, report of the chair. We do have an email, if you've not seen that, there's a survey out regarding the staff report and any recommendations to enhance the staff report and or streamline it. If you've not done so, I believe we have until the 25th to respond to that survey. That is tomorrow. That is the day that is after the 24th. Okay. And moving on, I believe we are at report from members. I will just go down the line, see if there's a report.
Thank you. We have a committee of the whole meeting this Thursday at 4 o'clock. And the agenda will change slightly. There are two items on the agenda, the special area study, Southeast area study, and a rezoning case. The rezoning case will be moved to the first item on the agenda.
And anything, Commissioner Elder? And Commissioner Raines?
Yeah, the next text change meeting is on February 15th, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Room 809.
Excellent. And Commissioner Dottell? Commissioner O'Haver?
Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend Committee of the Whole on Thursday.
Okay. Commissioner Otwell? And Commissioner Laitman?
Just a great meeting for the Alaska Strategic Planning Commission and meeting, and we don't have anything for the next committee, so thank you.
Okay.
Any feedback or topics that need to be discussed, please feel free to reach out.
Excellent. And I'm noting also the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee, which would generally meet on the 26th at 3 o'clock, does not have any items on the agenda, so that meeting is canceled. Okay. Excellent. Well, I will move on from report from the Assistant Director.
I don't actually think there's anything scheduled for text change committee, the next occurrence of the meeting, so I don't think that committee will need to meet unless you all know something, unless the chair knows something I don't.
We have secret information.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did not see any items on the agenda for the February 15th. Is that
And I am looking forward to seeing all of you, except for you, Mr. O'Haver, at Committee of the Whole on Thursday at 4 and 3:05.
Excellent. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission.